Is it possible to make a video about a Starship Troopers game without referencing that line from the movie or photoshopping yourself into some sort of mobile infantry armour for the thumbnail? Hi, I'm Calvin, and despite still having a cold, today we're going to be doing our part by demonstrating how these cliches are unavoidable and taking a look at 2022's Terran Command.
Let's go on a bug hunt.
Starship Troopers Terran Command is a middleweight RTS created by the Aristocrats and published by Slytherin. What do we mean by middleweight? Well, Terran Command sits somewhere in the big void between tiny indie productions and AAA games. It's an excellent example of the kind of things you'll find in Slytherin's catalogue, a solid strategy title that made smart choices on a limited budget. Slytherin's games are often relatively narrow in scope, and instead of trying to do too much with too little, they focus on exactly what the game needs to create an enjoyable experience and leave all of the unnecessaries behind. This is one of the secrets to Slytherin's continued success: modest titles for a reasonable price that don't need to shift millions of copies to break even. It's the reason they are one of my favourite publishers, and also the reason they've been in business for 24 years without going bankrupt or being bought by a major publisher. It's obvious by the title what universe this takes place in, but I think it's worth pointing out that it's based on the most excellent 1997 action satire film by Paul Verhoeven rather than the equally excellent but very different 1959 book by Robert A. Heinlein. If you're the kind of person that has got strong feelings about which is better, feel free to argue about it in the comments. Personally, I think the book and the film go hand in hand and complement each other really well. The book shows an idealised version of a quasi-democratic, authoritarian and militaristic utopia working well, while the film shows what would inevitably happen if any of the theory behind the book was actually put into practice. But onto the game. You get to control the mobile infantry as they attempt to defend the planet of Qualasha from the ever-increasing bug threat. This generally involves shooting, burning or exploding vast quantities of giant arachnids as they try to reach their own objectives, brutally murdering anything in their path. Individually, your soldiers don't have a chance, but with careful planning and the right tools you've got what it takes to get the job done. If you played the game for half an hour, you might end up thinking that this is a very generic RTS with a Starship Troopers skin, much as described by the doofus who wrote this review of it on Steam. This couldn't be further from the truth. The mechanics and the gameplay of Terran Command are nothing like any RTS I can think of, and have been meticulously created to serve the exact type of game that the creators intended. I find reviews like this really frustrating to read. It's wildly inaccurate and spends half of the time comparing it to a previous Starship Troopers game that is A, 24 years old, and B, not an RTS. The reviewer also complains that it tries to emulate the film rather than the story of the book. This tells me one thing: he's not read the book. The vast majority of the book is a mix of coming-of-age story and philosophical musings on might and individual sacrifice. The combat scenes are quite exciting and very well written, but I doubt they even cover a fifth of the book, and there's barely a mention of anything above small squad tactics. Not ideal material for a strategy game. Anyway, I digress. Combat in Terran Command is both fun and interesting. All of your units are generally very good when they're standing still with great lines of fire and a reasonable distance from the enemy. However, maintaining this isn't as easy as it sounds. Your troops are generally slow and take a bit of time to get moving and settle back into formation. Your line of sight is blocked by many of the terrain features and pretty limited, especially on the night missions. To complicate things further, your own troops block line of fire, so you can't just merge everything into a big ball and move forward. There are some powerful ranged enemies, but you can dodge quite a lot of their incoming fire if you pay attention to each battle. This means that you can dramatically increase your effectiveness with smart positioning and careful planning, and as such it means there's always something for you to do. Each unit also comes with its own activatable ability that's available on something like a 30-second cooldown, which, along with everything else, means that you are very much hands-on for the whole game. This is not something you can win by sporting a massive army and attack moving through objectives, and as such you're well immersed into every single firefight, and each victory feels particularly satisfying if it's well executed. There is quite a variety in the types of squad you can deploy, and I particularly enjoyed the fact that they all have some value. I counted 5 different types of line infantry, ranging from Mark I Marines up to the power suits, which generally deploy in 8 to 10 man squads. There are also 6 different support units, from engineers and tactical officers up to rocketeers and the almighty fleet liaison. On top of this, there are 3 different types of fixed defences you can construct, and 3 different suits of heavy battle mech-like armour that really bring the hurt. You're given quite a variety of challenges to overcome, and every job requires a different mix of tools. I really like the fact that the more basic squads and defences never became obsolete. The top end units you get later on in the game are incredibly powerful, but you don't get access to them early on in the mission. They cost more resources, they can't be everywhere at once, they can't handle all enemy unit types. They need support, so you still need your basic infantry and your combat engineers to succeed. There is also a unit veterancy system that adds even more variety into the units. Killing bugs grants experience, and when a certain level is achieved, that unit gets to pick one of either 2 or 3 special abilities that are unique to that unit type. These are all activatable and very powerful, and if used at the right time can turn a totally hopeless situation into a narrow victory. Your opponents generally fall into 3 categories: close combat slaughter machines, ranged harassers, and giant death monsters. The close combat variety are far more numerous and will attack you with huge hordes. These start with the drone, which are easily handled, and then move up to the warrior and then the tiger, which are increasingly harder to kill. On top of this, you get the hoppers, flying bugs that love to swoop in and pick off anyone who's busy concentrating elsewhere. While all this is going on, you'll be harassed by a number of ranged attackers like the spitters and the grenadiers, who if left unchecked will gradually wear down your forces. Every now and again, something truly huge will appear like a tanker, which is almost immune to your regular infantry weapons and requires special tools to take down with any speed. If you don't have these available, you're in for a very bad time, as all of your brave mobile infantry are melted before your very eyes. What's really interesting about Terran Command is the unique resource and base mechanics, which I'm going to dub the War of Attrition system. Instead of collecting and spending resources like you would in a normal RTS, you're instead building up your maximum commitment and then playing around with the allocations. There are 3 things that you need to take command of: supply, war support and dropships. Supply is the most basic. Let's say you start with 9 supply. It costs 3 supplies to deploy a squad of M1 Marines, so you can deploy 3 squads. If one of those dies, you can deploy a replacement squad. If you need the supply for something else, you can recall that squad. They'll be picked up by a dropship and the supply will be returned. War support works in a similar fashion. You might spend 1 on a HMG turret. If that turret dies or you voluntarily deconstruct it, you'll get that 1 war support back. This might sound like it results in a very easy game that's impossible to lose, but that is very much not the case. This is where the dropship limit comes in. You've only got so many dropships, and it takes time for each one to land, deploy a squad, and then fly back into space. If you only lose the occasional unit, then this won't be a problem, but if your force takes serious casualties, then it can take a long time to get reinforcements, time which you may not have. Dropships are also multi-use. You can use them to bring in new squads, reinforce wounded squads, or move units between bases, but each dropship can only be in one place at a time, so careful and thoughtful usage is a must. The other factor is the veterancy I mentioned earlier. High-level veteran units are very powerful, but if one is completely lost, then not only do you have to allocate a dropship to bring in a replacement squad, but that new squad also has to spend a decent amount of time in combat before it is as useful as the one that you lost. On top of this, it takes time for a squad to move from the drop zone to wherever your army is, and sometimes a single unit in open ground can be picked off by an enemy patrol. The enemy forces are limitless in their number, and as long as there are bug hives on the map, they will continue to spawn and attack your objectives. To quell the tide, you need to advance on these hives and take out the enemy opposition along the way, and hopefully arrive with enough strength to clear out the hive for good. It works a bit like this. Each hive is a number of bug symbols and a progress bar. The easier ones might have 2, the harder ones might have 4 or even more. Once this progress bar completes, one of these symbols lights up, indicating that the hive is stocked. If the hive is fully stocked and then the progress bar completes, an attack wave will spawn and head towards one of your bases or other critical objectives. If you get close to the hive, it will spawn one of its stored waves and attack your army with it. The closer you get to the hive, the shorter amount of time between these attack waves. Once a hive has run out of bugs, you can send in some soldiers to clear out the remainder and close that particular hive for good. This is a careful balancing act. If you approach too slowly, then the hive will have plenty of time to regenerate bugs, and you might find your forces slowly attrited to the point where you cannot get any closer. If you approach too fast, it might spawn so many enemies that you're quickly overwhelmed. You need to correctly calculate the right time to push and the right time to retreat, contain and regroup. All of this bug squashing action takes place over a 20 mission campaign that starts small and then ramps up to some truly epic struggles. Many of the missions are multi-stage and have various different routes or methods you can use to achieve victory. Sometimes you're on the attack and sometimes you're on the defense, often in the same mission, and then sometimes you're required to do both things simultaneously, holding a key objective with the skeleton force while sending out a strong attack to deal with the hives. The missions aren't all huge battles, and there are some small-scale engagements that give you a limited number of units to clear out an underground tunnel system and the like. Unlike many other RTS games where these missions are often kind of dull and unrewarding, Terran Command handles them pretty well, and the game engine supports this sort of play, and the missions themselves are designed well enough that they are still enjoyable and don't feel like a grind. I don't think I would welcome a whole campaign of them, but the occasional one between the larger efforts is still very welcome. There are also 5 standalone scenarios to tackle. Each one is of the same sort of quality as the better campaign missions, and they're no pushover. All in, it took me about 18 hours to complete the campaign and the challenges, after which I almost immediately jumped back in for a second playthrough on a harder difficulty level. There is enough variation between and within each mission that I was eager for a do-over, especially as I wanted to pick up the achievements and try out some of the tricks I didn't learn until near the end of my first playthrough. Since release, they've actually included a scenario editor with the game, and it seems pretty powerful, and I think with some practice you could probably create the kind of quality of missions that appear in the main campaign. There are a fair amount of user-created ones on the official Discord, so you certainly can get a little more out of the game that way. Graphically, I love it. It uses a great mix of pre-rendered structures and 3D models that really sells the setting, and the whole thing is exceptionally smooth and responsive. It also features a decent level of zoom, which always matters a lot to me in these games, and as such I found it very comfortable to play. The controls are simple and very self-explanatory, and everything is extremely well tooltipped and explained. Every time you're introduced to a new unit or a new enemy, you can click a button to view all of the details and get some ideas on how to use it or to counter it. It successfully replicates the look and feel of the '97 movie, right down to the propaganda visuals, broadcasts and themes. It purposefully lacks nuance. The mobile infantry is good, the bugs are bad, and any attempts to understand their motives are solely for the reason of better being able to kill them. The satirical elements of the film are not just present in the briefings, but also found in the gameplay itself. One mission has you escorting a condemned man to the prison complex so he doesn't miss his 6 o'clock live electrocution, and on another you're given a powerful honour guard unit that is followed around by a camera crew so they can grab some powerful propaganda footage to keep the population appropriately pumped. It's also one of those games that sounds as good as it looks.
Sir? Affirmative. Orders? Yes, sir.
Your troops are suitably gung-ho as they charge into battle. All of the weapon sounds and bug screeches are spot on, and generally all of the voice acting is absolutely on point. The music is especially well done. It's not just appropriate, but also uses a really clever system that builds the music around the in-game action.
Look this way.
I've seen music systems like this in some other games that choose a track to fit the mood, but Terran Command appears to go a step further. It's like each theme has calm, moody or dramatic segments that can be overlaid or dropped in and out of play whenever they're the most fitting.
Engineers reporting.
Complete.
It's worth highlighting that Terran Command is firmly and fully a single-player experience. No auto-matching, no co-op missions, no skirmishes and no multiplayer modes whatsoever. The human mind controls the mobile infantry, the AI mind controls the bugs, that's how the game is. This might seem like madness for an RTS, but after a little careful consideration I think it's actually a smart decision. This is not a $50 million game, nor is it a $5 million game. It's a very small team working with a limited budget, and the absolute truth of the matter is you can't create a good looking and well balanced multiplayer RTS with a decent storied campaign and 2 or 3 factions with a handful of people and a couple of years of development time. There's just too much ground to cover, and trying to balance and test the multiplayer mode is a huge undertaking all in itself, let alone all of the code and infrastructure required to make multiplayer happen in the first place. Limiting their goals and scope allowed them to create an absolutely fantastic and varied single-player campaign with great mission variety and replayability on a relatively shoestring budget. It looks great, it feels great and it plays great, and it was launched at the very reasonable price of $30. If this project was handled by a major studio, it would have cost millions of dollars to make, retailed for $60, included additional Day Zero DLC purchase options, and probably ended up as a massive flop that was forgotten in a couple of weeks, with 80 or 90% of the players never even touching the multiplayer in the first place. There's a good chance it would have been the downfall of whichever studio created it. RTS is a pretty niche genre, and unless you're releasing one of the games in the huge franchises, then there's no way you're going to sell enough copies to cover the massive development costs that come with AAA games. Overall, I'm a big fan of Terran Command. It's a couple of years old now, so it's not hard to pick up for something in the region of 15 to 20 bucks, a price that's well worth paying. It also has 2 DLC packages available for around 10 bucks a piece. General consensus was that the first one was pretty underwhelming and probably worth skipping, but I bought the second and I'm happy to report that it's really good. It comes with a new story campaign, new units, new mechanics and a couple of new scenarios, and is different enough from the base game to be sufficiently interesting. I'm also pleased to see that the game is still an active project and there's both a new DLC and a free update coming next year. The free update will include something called Territory Mode, configurable, multi-faceted battle missions that the developers hope will inject a bit more replayability into the game. So, if you want some decent single-player RTS action to keep you busy for a little while, then you can't go far wrong with Starship Troopers Terran Command. It's a really solid middleweight title, the true definition of an 8 out of 10 that not only features some interesting ideas, but is fun, engaging and challenging in equal measures. Hi there, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video then click the like button, and if you've played Terran Command let me know how you got on with a comment or on the Discord. And don't forget, subscription guarantees citizenship, so enlist today and I hope to see you back soon.